What was originally projected to be a low turnout election is turning out to be controversial. I'm joined now by some Statehouse reporters to talk about Issue 1, the abortion amendment, and a possible marijuana legalization ballot issue. Jeremy Pelzer is a reporter covering politics for Cleveland.com. And Natalie Fahmy is Ohio Statehouse Bureau reporter for the Nexstar Media Group. Welcome to both of you.
Great to be here.
Okay, well, let's get started here. The abortion amendment was certified this week, and the next step for it is the Ohio ballot board, where the GOP-dominated panel will determine what voters will see when they go into the voting booth to vote on the issue. What do you expect will happen there? I'll start ladies first. Natalie, what do you think is going to happen?
I think the ballot board is a really, it's just kind of a process step. So really all they have to do is make sure that it's a single issue amendment and that what voters are seeing, is straightforward, not confusing, that sort of thing. So it's not really like they can interject their opinions about it or shut it down because they disagree with the contents of it. It's really just very much a process step.
Jeremy, you think we're going to see fire over there?
I think they already crossed the big hurdle to get this on the ballot, which is to collect the more than 400,000 signatures, valid signatures that they needed. That's no easy feat. So I think it's exceedingly likely, as Natalie said, that this will end up being sort of a rubber stamp, and we'll see this on the ballot in November.
Well, Governor DeWine, a staunch opponent of abortion rights, has said for a while now that he thinks the 6-week abortion ban that's currently on hold by the courts needs to be clarified. And when asked earlier this week if he wants lawmakers to come back into session to do that if Issue 1 fails, he said he didn't want to talk about that right now, but he kind of hinted that it might be a possibility. What are you folks hearing? Jeremy, I'll start with you.
Well, he was talking with reporters at the Ohio State Fair on Wednesday, and he hinted very strongly that after the August 8th special election is over, he is going to follow through on what he is saying, which is he wants lawmakers to clarify and put in more detail what Ohio's abortion laws are. Right now, Ohio has, or at least passed, a heartbeat bill that bans abortion after about 6 weeks into a pregnancy. However, that's going through the courts now about its constitutionality. And Mike DeWine obviously is looking at things like the story of that 10-year-old who had to go to Indiana to get an abortion. And he wants them to basically make sure that the abortion laws in the state are more crystal clear about what can or cannot be done.
Mm-hmm. Natalie, you agree?
Yeah, I echo everything Jeremy just said there.
When Michigan passed its constitutional amendment, the campaign for it featured doctors who said women would be put at risk without the option of abortion. And it featured business leaders who said the economy would suffer without the passage of the amendment. The campaign against the amendment called it extreme and said it went further than Michigan residents wanted. We've already been hearing those arguments on both sides here in Ohio. As we go into the fall, how do you think this campaign will play out, Natalie?
I think it's going to play out really similarly to what you were just talking about with Michigan. And like you said, we're already hearing that so much of the Issue 1 debate surround what we're going to be seeing in November. So I think it's going to be a lot of, well, Ohioans don't really want abortion. The amendment would make it up to the point of fetal viability. And the side against that, they're calling those late-term abortions and saying that that's not something that Ohioans actually want. And then the side for it says we need to give this choice to women and doctors. There could be extenuating circumstances, things like that. So they say it's a safety issue and also an issue of choice.
Mm-hmm. Jeremy, anything?
I agree with everything Natalie says. I might just add, though, that we've already seen opponents of this abortion rights amendment trot out another argument, which is about parental rights, because they argue that it's not just about abortion, it's also about things about parents having the right to know about, for example, transgender surgery that their child might have to go through.
Yeah, and of course, we've seen the other side say, yeah, well, parental rights wouldn't be affected because this is a constitutional right, and constitutional rights don't necessarily, affect kids, because you look at the right to vote or another right given in the Constitution, there are some limits. So there's, both sides are kind of playing that, a different way. So even though we know that Issue 1 opponents are bipartisan, we're seeing Republican leaders go all out for issue 1. Do you think that many voters, especially those who might not be in tune with what's happening daily here at the Statehouse, might be more swayed by the politics, the partisan plays, rather than the merits of issue 1 itself?
I think a lot of people we see vote on their party lines. I mean, there's some people who are kind of swing voters, split ballot voters, things like that. But I think in a state like Ohio, you see a lot of people voting down their party lines and what their party wants. But like you said, issue 1's a little bit more complicated because there's some bipartisan support on the no side of this. So it'll be interesting to see really what the breakout turnout numbers are.
Anything to add?
I think the people who are voting yes on this and supporting that, they want to make it more partisan because, and you can see it in their ads when they're talking about don't make Ohio California, don't let liberal special interests take over the state. I think if you're the no side, you want to make it less partisan and less about a Republican versus Democrat thing, so you can have voters come out and vote on the merits of the proposal itself. Rather than making it a Republican or Democrat issue, because Ohio is increasingly a Republican state, and so if you do that, you risk losing a number of voters.
So speaking of partisanship, do you think Republicans who have been at the front of this issue will pay a political price for it if it fails? I'm thinking of Secretary of State Frank LaRose, who's now running for the U.S. Senate. Do you think it will help or hurt him? What do you think, Natalie?
You know, I think it will depend ultimately what ends up happening in November, because whether or not issue 1 fails, I think there's going to be some Republicans who are okay with it and some who aren't okay with it. But I think November, I think that's definitely a more partisan issue. And I think if that fails, it's going to be, well, because the Secretary of State couldn't get issue 1 to pass. And that's why this abortion amendment passed and is now enshrined in our Constitution. And I think that will really strongly be used against him in campaigns.
I think the caveat that we don't know how this is going to end up. Right. There are polls that show one thing, but we don't know. But with that, if issue 1 ends up failing, you're going to see a lot of finger pointing among Republicans, some of which will be used for people's gain. For example, there is a potential House Speaker battle brewing between the sitting Speaker, Jason Stephens, and now current Senate President Matt Huffman, who's term limited. And if issue 1 goes down in flames, that you're already starting to see a little inkling of placing the blame, laying that at the feet of Jason Stephens as a reason to vote for Matt Huffman.
Yeah, interesting. Well, early voting, it's underway now. We know that Democrats have, pretty much always encouraged early voting. Republicans, not so much. This time around, we're seeing a shift. We're seeing Republicans, the Republican Party's out there telling their folks to vote. And I've even seen former President Donald Trump make a statement like that. Do you think that early vote message is resonating with voters this time around, Jeremy?
Well, keep in mind, this is going to be, by measures of like a regular general election, going to be a pretty low turnout. It might be higher than what we thought, which was going to be an 8 to 10% turnout, but it's still going to be fairly low. It's going to be, looks like maybe along the lines of last August's legislative primary election, which is the second primary election of the year. So with that said, Republicans have learned from their past elections where they kind of discouraged early voting. And what do you know? Fewer people turned out to vote. And so now there's a more heavy push. We don't know, of course, yet who of the people who've turned out to vote, who are Republicans, who are Democrats. But there's a much more heavy focus on that. With that said, Republicans tend to vote on Election Day, just traditionally, more so than Democrats. And so on Election Day, it'll probably be more Republicans coming out to vote than Democrats.
Yeah, you agree?
Definitely. Most trends always show Democrats coming out to vote early and Republicans playing catch up on Election Day. And, when I talk to people on the vote yes and vote no side, the vote yes side definitely really drives home that point. They're like, in the last U.S. Senate race, J.D. Vance was behind when all the early vote numbers came in, and then he ended up beating Tim Ryan quite comfortably.
Mm-hmm. Well, if issue 1 does fail, do you think those who oppose abortion in the November election will change their message? I'll start with you, Natalie.
I don't think so. I think they have been putting out their message since before we knew it was going to be on the ballot, and I think that message is going to stay strong. And this is not what Ohioans want. This will allow what they call late-term abortions. This will take away parental rights. So I really think those are the points they're going to continue to drive home.
Yeah.
I think Natalie's absolutely right. We're just seeing sort of a preview now, round one, the hors d'oeuvre of the main course of what's going to be the November election.
So we know if issue 1 passes, it will make it harder for the abortion amendment to pass. And we know that polling has traditionally been off in recent years. So do you think that the abortion amendment could reach a 60% threshold? And if it does, would that make it more difficult for the people who are now pushing for issue 1 on the basis of abortion to then come back with another constitutional change to undo the amendment?
Well, the conventional wisdom going into all of this is that the 60% threshold would make it very hard to pass an abortion rights amendment, because if you look at other states such as Kansas that have passed similar amendments, it was somewhere between the 52 and 59% voter passage rate. So if you look at other states, it would not pass if the same thing happened here. But as you said, yeah, Joe, there's some polling showing that it would be above 60%. Now, it's early. It all depends on how many people actually turn out to vote. There's a lot going on that we don't know going into the November election. But if that does end up happening, well, it might actually be a blessing in disguise for anti-abortion activists if issue 1 fails, because as you said, that they can try to come back and if not fully repeal that amendment with another amendment, then to water it down or take different pieces of it about, for example, when viability is, or other things like transgender surgeries, things like that.
Mm-hmm. What about that, Natalie?
Yeah, definitely. I think we've already heard people like Senate President Matt Huffman allude to the fact if this abortion amendment passes in November that they will be back to the ballot box again. And he says, well, first he says that's why it's important for issue 1 to pass, so we don't have this ping pong back and forth. But he says if that's what it comes to, it's what it comes to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Opponents of issue 1 say it gives the minority control over the majority in 2 ways. First, by allowing 41% of voters to have control over the majority. And secondly, in the petition process changes, it would mandate a certain number of signatures from each county, each of Ohio's 88 counties. And that, they say, would allow 1 or 2 counties to stall the process of a citizen-led amendment for the entire state. Do you see this minority-majority argument resonating with voters?
Well, I think both sides are kind of playing to the majority-minority argument, and I think at the end of the day, they need to make clearer arguments. I think right now things are getting so cloudy and foggy with all the other issues surrounding it. So I can't tell you what's resonating with voters, but I just think they need to make a more clear argument about what's at stake for issue 1. Because, people might hear, oh, majority rule, minority rule, and they're just like, okay, sure. But if they really lay out what's at stake on either side, I think that's the strongest argument.
Jeremy?
Yeah, I think Natalie's right that this has kind of been foggy because there's a lot of different narratives going on. This is seen as basically a proxy election for this abortion rights amendment in November, but at the same time, it's not an abortion rights amendment. It's about changing the threshold to change the state constitution, which, by itself isn't the easiest to explain. Well, right now it's 50% plus 1, and they would raise it to 60, and if you can kind of get lost in the numbers. What you're saying about minority rule governing, at least, is germane to the issue 1 argument. But it's kind of easy, as Natalie was saying, to kind of get lost in those details. And so that's why many other people are just saying, well, it's about abortion. Mm-hmm. And if you like abortion rights, well, you should vote against this amendment.
Well, let's talk about something else, a possible marijuana legalization law that could be before voters this fall to make it legal for adults 21 and older to use cannabis. It could eventually be certified for the ballot. It was pretty close in getting certified this week. And we have seen more states legalize marijuana since 2015, the last time Ohioans voted on a marijuana legalization measure. Have attitudes changed toward legal pot, and do you see an increased chance for passage of this plan, Natalie?
I think attitudes have probably definitely changed in the last 10 years or so about marijuana and legalizing pot. I just had a discussion with Senate Minority Leader Nikki Antonio, and she even said, a few years ago I was against it, I didn't want it, but now I've kind of changed my tune to that. I mean, it can bring in a lot of tax dollars to the state. We can put that money to a lot of really great programs, schools, things like that. So I think attitudes have definitely changed. It just is a matter of how much have they changed and how many people have changed their mind on it.
Plus, in 2015, when you had that Responsible Ohio amendment, a lot of people who, in theory, ideologically support marijuana legalization did not vote for it because they did not like the exact plan. It would have written in the Constitution specific geographical areas, plots of land in the state that specific people owned that could grow marijuana. And I think a lot of people didn't like that. They thought it was going to lead to kind of cronyism and benefit a very select group of people. Now, this amendment that's being proposed now is different than that, so I think you might get more people on board who did not vote for it in 2015.
Yeah, and this is a law, so it's really not a constitutional amendment. So if voters pass it, lawmakers could come right back and change it afterwards. They could modify it somehow. Do you think that could water down the opposition to it this fall? I mean, if people are, thinking, oh, well, they can change it, that's not as important as this constitutional issue.
I think the people that are knowledgeable enough about Ohio state government to know that would probably go in and vote anyway, because if you don't pass the law in the first place, then there's nothing to repeal if you're in favor of it.
What do you think?
Yeah, I also think if they come out in a large number and they pass this, say, and I'm not saying that it's going to pass by 60% or 70% or however high, but the bigger number they pass it by, I think that kind of tells lawmakers, oh, this is the will of the people. Maybe we should listen to the will of the people, because, there's only so far they can go. If it passes by a narrow majority, then maybe lawmakers would be more inclined to do that, but you never know at the Ohio Statehouse.
Yeah, you never know at the Ohio Statehouse. Legal weed, abortion rights on the same ballot. If that happens, what do you think about that? Will that help or hurt the issues, how that plays out?
I think it will I think the turnout will be really big. I think we can expect that in November, whether or not the marijuana issue is on the ballot, but I can't say whether it will hurt or help. It will definitely bring out more voters if they're both on there, so it just depends on.
It'll be big for an off-year election. If this was next year, it would be kind of oversized because you have a presidential race and a U.S. Senate race on the ballot. You're not going to have that in November. But yeah, Natalie's right. At the same time, you're going to have a lot of attention, much more attention drawn to it than, no offense to Andy Ginther, than the Columbus mayor's race, which is one of the other top tier races this year. But yeah, I think you're going to be more likely to have proponents of marijuana legalization come out. There's not a huge anti-marijuana organized side. You have people like Mike DeWine who don't like it, but you don't have like an organized opposition to it. You will have an organized opposition, there already is, to the abortion rights amendment. So I think that will dominate the airwaves this fall.